welcome to the School of Speech podcast, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. School of Speech is designed specifically for the school-based SLP to come together to discuss current topics, tackle difficult situations, and share our insights. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Carolyn Dolby. I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for School of Speech. School of Speech is designed for all of us school-based SLPs so we can come together, explore all those current trends, share our insights, and really champion our expertise. Our goal is to bolster confidence, celebrate our triumphs, and foster a community dedicated to the excellence in the school setting. All right, y'all. Today's episode is strategies, solutions, and supports for school-based SLPs. We have Lauren Murphy Arner with us today to help us tackle unique challenges us school-based SLPs face. She will be navigating through workload versus caseload, which will elevate our understanding of how these factors impact our day-to-day. So I am glad, and you're going to be glad that you're here with us today, because we're going to be exploring practical strategies for overcoming long-standing issues in school-based practices. So just settle in for a great episode, okay? We do have a little housekeeping. A nice reminder is that each of these podcasts are 60 minutes, and they are offered for ASHA CEUs, 0.1 ASHA CEUs. I'm super excited to share with you what we've come up with. I want to go over our financial disclosures. Financial disclosures for Lauren. She is a full-time employee of ASHA and is receiving an honorarium for her participation in today's discussion. Non-financial, Lauren is an ASHA certified speech language pathologist, and she's a member of ASHA. She is the ex officio to ASHA's Special Interest Group 16 school-based issues. She's a member of SIG 1, which is Language Learning and Education. And for me, I'm a salaried employee of Portland Public Schools. I receive compensation for my graduate courses I teach at the University of Houston. I also receive compensation for my consulting that I do with school districts across the nation, supporting feeding and swallowing program development and staff training. And last on financial for me is I do receive compensation for my dream job, which is being SpeechTherapyPDs.com host for School of Speech. Non-financial, I am a member of Texas Speech and Hearings Feeding and Swallowing Task Force. I volunteer for Feeding Matters, and I'm really proud to be a member of ASHA and their special interest groups 13, 14, and 16. Who cares about me now? Let's get to know Lauren even better. Lauren is the Associate Director of School Services for Speech Language Pathology at American Speech Language and Hearing Association, ASHA. Whoop, whoop. She provides consultation to ASHA staff, SLPs, educators, families, and consumers regarding the practice of speech language pathology in the school setting. We couldn't have a more perfect person for this talk today. Lauren's clinical interests include developmental language disorder and students who use AAC. Lauren enjoys speaking and writing on professional topics, including interprofessional practice in schools, technology and education, universal design for learning, and neurodiversity. Before coming to ASHA in 2019, Lauren worked in private and public schools, early intervention, pediatric clinics, and private practice in Pennsylvania and Virginia. Wow, Lauren, so exciting to have you here. How are you?
Oh my goodness, that is a mouthful, all the things you said. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so honored that you asked to come and speak. I'm just such a fan of your podcast also, and a fan of you and all of the work that you do. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Oh, that is so sweet. This has been the most fun experience. It's coming to the end of the year for me on this. And you're actually the last podcast of this year. We'll be starting up our next season after the new year. So super excited to have you end my first season. So as we
Yeah.
begin, I know my question before we started the podcast, I even said to Lauren, I said, I'm so excited for this one because, I mean, as an educated woman, I understand workload and caseload, but do I? Do I really understand the difference? Could you help a fellow clinician out by getting us started with that?
Absolutely. And it's such a nuanced conversation. And sometimes
Yeah.
we really refer to them as one thing, right? We'll say caseload workload, when in
Yeah.
reality, they're really two separate, distinct things. So I like to think of caseload as like your roster number. You know, if you're listing all the students that you have that have IEPs, or say you're in early intervention IFSPs or 504 plans. So all those kids that you have on your roster, number of kids on your caseload. In some places, if you do have something called a response to intervention or multi-tiered system of support, so that those kids that aren't yet on an IEP, but you're still in that cycle of intervening, those also could be part of your caseload, but
Yeah.
they also could not. So here's kind of the difference depending on your area. So that's caseload, just the number, right? What we really want to think about and look at is what do we need to do for each one of those students every day that actually takes up the most time, right? Not just the number, but what is our workload? So every task that you need to do as a school-based SLP to help support each and every one of those students. So if you think about it, if I've had a caseload of 70, I've had caseloads of 45. Actually, my caseload of 45, because that encompassed a lot of students who were AAC users, who had a lot more medically complex needs, who had feeding and swallowing and different
Sure.
things. And they had much more meetings. We had safety plans, feeding plans, and things. So we had multiple meetings per year for each one of those students. And so that the workload for that caseload this year, for that school year, excuse me, was much higher for me than when I was working in middle and high school, where I had a lot of students that were working on post. I was really doing consult with the teacher, and the teachers were helping deliver the intervention. So that can look so different depending on the makeup of your caseload. So I really like to say you really got to think more than just the number. What does it include? Like, what does it include in your workload? Does that make sense to you?
It
Also,
does.
please,
I
people,
can,
put the information in the chat if
oh
I'm
yeah,
not being clear.
in the chat, yeah, does that make clear? Does that make clear? So, like, for me, you're saying caseload is, for me, the easy math. Caseload, purely your number on your roster. I like the way you said that, the number on your roster, how many bodies are on your roster. Okay, so, but workload is the task demand that each of those students require can be very different, especially, which makes me think of depending on what type of campus you're on. If you're on a campus that doesn't have special programs,
Absolutely.
your caseload is going to look much different than a campus that has all the special programs, maybe the self-contained classrooms. Everyone has a different name for like life skills or those kind of campuses, or even if you have ECSC on your campus.
That's what I was going to say. If you have some
That's
specialized
huge.
preschool programs, you'll often see a high caseload in workload even in those cases if you have a lot of preschool programs. Or, for
Right.
example, what if you travel to different schools? You got to
Mhm.
think about the time that you're traveling, the time that it takes for you to get there and set up in your space. So all of those things that encompass your workday.
Yeah. And so how do we come up, how do we understand? So I think it's easy for us to decide what our caseload is.
Sure.
We have our numbers, we can run a report and we
Mhm.
see how many students have an IEP, but then what do we do with workload?
Sure. Well, there's lots of different ways that you can approach how to figure out what your workload was, say for that week or for that month. Some states actually have their own specific workload calculator, which is awesome because then you don't have to do any digging to find anything. Places like North Carolina and Ohio, they have their own state-specific calculator, which is helpful, right? Because they know some of the expectations that they need to fulfill in their state. ASHA also has a more general workload tool. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. And basically what you do, there are different versions. So say you do telepractice, you could even use it for telepractice. You go in, you look at how many evaluations did I have this week? How much time did I spend on paperwork? And you enter in all those numbers in addition to things like, did I have a lunch duty? Did I have to do bus duty? So all those extra things. Do I have an SLPA? Like how much did I have to supervise that SLPA or that graduate student? So all those extra things that goes into your job duties and responsibilities in addition to what we have to do for our students every day. From there, those workload calculators, what they do, I'll speak specifically to the ASHA one because it's the one I know best. It actually gives you a visual. So you can put in, these are my contracted hours. I work 7.5 contracted hours, or I get paid 6.5 contracted hours per day. And it will actually give you a visual to say, actually, your workload is going way over what your contracted hours per day are, which we all know intuitively, right? Like we're all doing Medicaid billing, we're all doing IEPs outside of that time, but showing the visual to someone, I think is really helpful to get them to understand what more than that number that we see on a sheet. So yeah, I think that's one way that we can capture it and share it with others to show them what we do every day.
And I think that's really important. And KK, thank you for jumping in. Also, if you think about if you have a high ratio of children that have advocates or lawyers, that also impacts your workload.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I think it is more than just a number. Guess what? Yeah.
Yeah, and some of those things too, like if you take into account how you have to do some extra research, like let's make sure I know all the systematic reviews for, say, a student that has an AAC device, or I have a student with feeding and swallowing. Do I know exactly best practices? Well, those things you really have to know also if you're going to go into any due process situation. So time to do those things, right? That's your workload, and you have to build that into something like a workload calculator to capture all of it.
And so I guess in my mind, I'm thinking about workload calculator. Is this one more thing I have to do? How does that, but tell us how it would benefit us. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I'm
Yeah.
like, now I'm like, one more thing.
I feel the same way. And I will be honest, like I am not the person you want to call if you have a problem with Excel. Like it's not my skill set here. I'm great with language, but not Excel. So I totally feel you. And especially when, say, you do have a high caseload and high workload happening, you don't want to think about having to do one more thing. And so I would first look at what is already expected of you from a documentation standpoint from your like lead SLP. So instead of having to do something brand new, like take whatever it is that your lead SLP or your special education administrator is asking from you, what data they're asking for, and then kind of track on your own, how long is that taking you? Did that take you a few minutes? Did it take you an hour? How long is your Medicaid billing taking you? So in small chunks. I like to say, well, in the perfect world, like from a high level view, right, we'd want to have all of that data captured, and we want to be able to show the chart and go in and advocate together for change. But if you're really at the end of your year, at the beginning of your year in January, I think it's great to sit down with the intention of, I'm just going to track this part of my caseload and workload. If that's all I can do this month, like I'm just going to track my evaluations, or I know this is a really high referral season, I'm just going to track how much time that's taking outside of work for me. So I would tell you though that if you do want to make some change when we're coming up towards talking about contracts in March and things like that, I would really encourage you to sit down and go through it, especially with upcoming in-service days. Just take an hour, take 30 minutes, put on a timer, and see how much information you could get just from your past week, just 1 week before. Like, do your best guess. And then that's really going to empower you to have some data to go into your SLP leads or to your administrator to talk more about, this is really heavy for me right now. I have this many evaluations. This is how much time it takes up for me, and I need some additional support in this area, maybe for the next few weeks, if that's possible. And so coming in with the data and a solution is often met more favorably, right, than just coming in and saying, this is too overwhelming. I don't know what to do. Both are true. One might have a better or more successful response, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're spot on when we come in with an ask. I don't like calling it a problem because that always puts a negative connotation to it.
Sure.
When you're coming with an ask, even if it's a big ask, not only are you come with the ask, but come with the solution that you want.
Sure.
That,
Sure.
because then that's less thinking for them too, because then you're not getting, oh, let me think on that. You're like, well, actually, no, here's what I
Hmm.
need and here's how it can happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a better chance of getting what you need when you tell them exactly what you need. Yeah.
And you can kind of go in with I was curious. It felt like our referrals, we were getting a lot of referrals. It felt like we were doing a lot of evaluations, whatever has been happening for you in that specific season. You can say, I was curious about what's been happening this school year. And so I went back and I looked at this and I tracked it. And here's what I found when I saw that. So you're coming from it as an ask, but also hey, this is interesting. I wonder what the trends are. I wonder if this is happening more than just in our school, maybe in the neighboring school. And here's what's happening in our school district. So kind of framing it in that way when you're going to talk to an administrator, I find they're a little more receptive maybe to the conversation. They start to get curious as well. Like, I wonder why some of this is happening. Is it happening across the board and in other areas? So I think that's always the best way to walk into those kinds of conversations.
I know you were talking about like trends. That's true. And then, what is causing a trend kind of makes me think of, how do we stay current with what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, and we've got to be current, up to date. What can we do with that? How do we stay current and get the latest research? Because if we have that data, like let's say our workload and we're researching, we want to have the data that supports like a certain whatever we're needing. How do we do that without getting overwhelmed?
Absolutely. That's such a great point. So if we're talking clinically, like say, for example, I am not an expert on childhood apraxia of speech. It's not my niche. If I walked in and saw coming back to school in January that I had a bunch of students that had apraxia of speech, that would be something I'd be like, okay, I really got to figure this out. Where can I go to find the best information quickly? I think having those sources that you know and trust is super helpful. I will just mention a few for ASHA just because I'm not familiar with them, but I love this podcast, let me tell you, because you can listen and learn at the same time. But specifically from ASHA, we have what's called evidence maps. And so basically, you can go into an evidence map, say for childhood apraxia of speech, for dysphagia or feeding and swallowing, and you just click a button, and then the most current evidence actually comes right up. So you'll see the most recent systematic reviews, and then it gives you a summary. You don't even have to read through the whole paper, and if the evidence is strong or not strong, what the recommendations are. So that's my first stop if I need to find out some more information or has anything changed recently. And as we know, everything is changing. We're all learning again about things like neurodiversity and neurodivergence and social skills. We're all relearning that. Those of us that are even just 10 years into our career are relearning how best to approach it. So having these go-to trusted places where you can go and look quickly. I would say we all have to keep up with our learning either way. Like, we have to be lifelong learners either way. So just going to places like this and to ASHA to make sure that you can find the information quickest, and ones that you can also pull out really easily in those high conflict cases as well, KK, that you were talking about. So if you are in a place that has more due process, right, or has more meetings with lawyers, you want to be able to provide, they're going to ask you for those things. They're going to ask you for why you made that specific treatment decision, and can you find it? Go right to that evidence map, go right to that most initial systematic review, and there's your answer to provide to a parent or to a special education administrator.
And all of it, and it takes time.
It does.
It takes time for us. And so how can we really advocate for ourselves just so that, because especially with those that have a large caseload where you are having to defend and or what, it could be anything, really, but what can we do to keep our workloads manageable? Because to me, yes, caseload is a number, and That's some data, but like you said, you had a caseload of 45, but the workload was so much more.
Mhm.
How can we make sure that it's not just our caseload, but our workload is manageable?
I think it starts first with, we talked about a little bit in the beginning, like with the role, like do people understand what we do? First of all,
Okay.
first and
Yeah.
foremost, do the people around us that work with us actually understand what we do as a speech language pathologist? That can take time. It can take relationship building. And I want to just remind everybody that's here, we can get into these really heavy topics about caseload and workload, and it can feel really daunting and really overwhelming. But I want to say to you to also remember why you do this in the first place, the joy that you get, and really why we're all here is to help our students become really awesome members of the community in the way that they can contribute to our school community and to the world. So I know we're talking about a lot of heavy stuff, and I like to bring it back to like, why are we here and why are we doing it? And why are we pushing through and advocating? It's because if we can get more support for ourselves, then our students are going to thrive in our sessions and we're going to be able to pour more into them. So as a caveat, let's move back.
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. I think it's good just to mention when we get into talking about these heavy things to just remember why we're here in the first place in the schools. So what were we talking about? We were just talking about how can we advocate, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I read this quote recently by Martha Beck. It's more of a metaphor where she talks about like the eagle that's soaring up above, right? And that's like an overarching plan that you want to have. So what we want to have is we want to be able to provide our student services to their individual needs, that they're able to access the education in school. Like that's our job as school-based SLPs. But we know that sometimes there are so many things in the way of that right now, things like shortages, things like actual physical time and resources and all of these barriers. So what she said is look for like the tiny mouse steps, right? Don't look at the whole big picture yet. What are the small things that you can do to advocate for yourself in your building, even just with a teacher that you have a really good relationship with? So say you've never tried classroom-based therapy, it can be a great way to reduce your workload. It might take a little bit of consultation with that teacher or a little bit of setting it up, but overall it will reduce that workload down, and it actually helps your students move off that caseload a little bit faster. So thinking about where you have those relationships already with our teachers, with your OTs and PTs, can you talk together? Can you band together to think about how day to day you can make that workload a little bit less? And then from a larger perspective, I would say if you have more than one SLP in your district, to really try to form a relationship together. Because I feel like if we have a unified voice when we go to advocate, whether it's with our lead SLP, with our district administrator, all the way up to say a superintendent at a superintendent's meeting to a state level, the more voices that we have together, the more likely they are to listen. So there are these teeny tiny small steps we can take. And then there are those larger steps we can take to advocate at the state level, especially. I can go into any of those in more detail for certain.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about the mouse steps, it reminds me of, I think it was our mutual friend, Julie Malone, when she was talking about she came on for being advocate for change. She said she called it low hanging fruit.
Exactly.
I love the sound of that. I love everything. She says, yeah, and exactly what you're saying is go for the easy route. Find the teacher that is going to want to collaborate with you. Yeah, start with the low hanging fruit.
Build those relationships, right? Build the relationships. Who do you have the most students with? Right? Where's the teacher that you have the most students in common with, and start there. Can you do a collaborative lesson? Because if you do that and you spend, say, an hour in their class and you have all these different options for how you can see those students, it really does reduce your workload burden down. You're not planning as long. If you set up a good process, it becomes really easy as you keep moving. I love talking more about interprofessional practice and how we can do things together, like writing goals and different things to also reduce our workload down. We can take collective data. That could be a whole nother podcast in itself. These are just some examples of ways that we can all work together to meet the needs of students instead of having to feel like it's all on us, which I know a lot of us feel as school-based SLPs, like we are solely responsible for all of this to happen. And, you know, to try to look at it more as we are a piece of this really important community that we're in, and how can we work together to make it easier for us and better for our students.
You really hit something on the head that I get all the time. I always feel that speech is going to fix it. We feel that we have to do it. I would love for you to lead us into more of that interprofessionalism. How can it not just be us? How would that help our workload?
Absolutely. So I will say, first of all, some of my absolute favorite years in the schools have been when I've had a really great relationship with the OT, who may not even have been a direct employee, or the PT, but we banded together to do more job-related things in the middle school and achieved the same level of goals. We took data together and all of these things. So I feel like, once again, that is a large thing that we're talking about. Let's scale it back down to a mouse step, right?
Okay.
So I think interprofessional practice can lessen our workload by doing things like, we're going to do one collaborative planning that can happen now in a variety of ways. Now that we have Zoom, we have lots of amazing asynchronous tools. And basically, if you plan, you can keep repeating that same lesson with a different theme, or say the OT plans one week, the SLP plans the next week, the PET plans the next week, but we have an overall theme of where we're going. So we don't have to do as much of that planning time. We're kind of sharing that burden equally, using classroom materials all together without even just walking into that room and knowing we're going to be doing circle time, right? That takes a lot of the planning off of us, or the workload. I really love collective data taking. If you've not done that before, especially in, like, I'm going to say, give another example of the preschool setting, but we would have sheets out, right, that were de-identified, but we knew everyone had their own shape, and we would put data down for each kid. But I would just come back, say, at the end of the month, and I would have more data than I could take in just that 45 minutes that I was with that child. I had data from everybody, and what a more comprehensive picture. And it reduced my workload down pretty significantly, but it also gave more information to give to the family and the teachers over the long term. So those are just small examples of just putting a piece of paper in a classroom and talking for maybe 15 minutes about doing something, and really getting a huge amount of carryover. And then also that added collaboration and better student outcomes in that specific instance. So just a quick example.
I love that. Being the collective data when you paired it with that carryover, also, but I also like the idea of collective data, including the teacher, so that she knows that it's her role too. Like, it's not just our responsibility.
Absolutely.
Right? Because what is done just in the speech room isn't why we're here. We're doing things in the speech room, so it's happening in the classroom. That's why I was on some social media. I wish sorry who's ever listening and you wrote this and I thought it was great and I don't remember your name. It was, children don't come to school for therapy. They have therapy so they can go to school.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so great.
Right?
Wherever you are. What a great thought.
are.
Yeah, that is, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
It really is.
Is that they're not coming just for us. We're here so they can get into school. And I think that we need to remember that. I mean, as speech paths, we are all amazing. And I know we all know we are, because we are. But we also have to think about the system that we're in. Right? Yeah.
Right. And the purpose of us being there, right? And say we're taking a kid out twice a week for 30 minutes, which I hope we're not doing that all the time forever, but That's not much time in comparison to the other 6 hours that they're in school all day. So how can we best translate it to the other staff members and share that burden? Because it is, especially if a child has an IEP, it's not just the speech pathologist's responsibility to make sure that we're carrying over. And as you see the kids move up through the grade levels, especially if a child has a language disorder, you'll start to see immediately the goals start to overlap to begin with, right? You'll see a special education goal that's tied to a language goal. And so why are we writing separate goals instead of working together, right? It's more clear for the parents, it's more clear for the school, and it really reduces the burden for you as well. So those are some ideas.
And they're great. They're great ideas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. I think looking at, so we've got, I don't know what we can do about shortages in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. What can we do about shortages in time? My goodness.
well, time because we said if we have to have a duty.
Yes. I know. I'm sure there are some of you that are here with us and then also listening that are probably rolling their eyes a bit like, do I really have to be the person that stands by and wait for the bus and hold the door? Like, is that really something? Is that the best use of my skill set as a speech language pathologist, considering our workload, right? It's not about not wanting to be part of the school community because we do 1,000 other things to participate and be great members of that school community. But the reality is we normally have meetings, or we need to have meetings sometimes during that time period before the day really gets going and at the end of the day as it's winding up. And so we talk a lot about how can we practice at the top of our license, right? Like be doing what a speech language pathologist was trained to do instead of doing those extra things like lunch duty or bus duty, unless you're using them as an opportunity to do some sort of collaborative session in like lunch or something like that, but not as an extra duty. And sometimes I think that really comes down to getting to know your administrator, your principal of your building, your assistant principal, and having them understand what your day-to-day work looks like instead of just kind of hanging out in our own office. And I was 100% guilty of this. I was like, I need to put my head down. I need to get all these notes done. But then when I started to make those relationships in the school, that's when I felt those things start to shift a little bit more. I was able to ask for those things to be shifted. Later.
And I think also asking for, if you do have speech leads, I know my district, when I was in Houston, I was really appreciative that our speech department, our speech leads stood up for us to say, that's not working at the top of their license. And I was very appreciative. I know that that's not happening everywhere. And I know there are still a lot of districts, but that comes up with, so that's the problem with time, is not doing a duty. But then with shortages, even just staff shortages, not just SLPs, but overall shortages, is that, safety of getting the kids out of the school, Yeah, it's absolutely. Just tough. It is, working in the schools is not for the weak.
Absolutely not. Absolutely. They're some of the hardest working humans that you will ever encounter. That's for sure. And, the shortages with teachers and with speech language pathologists, all related services, really, we're seeing it across the board in different areas. And, I found the more that I talk to people every day from different parts of the country and in different situations with shortages. And I know they've been able to work things out by using things like SLPAs and extenders, if that's possible in your state. And that really does free up some of your time. You still have to do some supervision, but at least we're able to help the kids get the interventions that they need when they need it. So there are a few different coalitions that are working on together on how to continue to recruit more students or even graduate students to come into the schools. So continuing to really talk up how rewarding it can be to work in the schools and helping those graduate students see the benefit of being in our profession, I think is really positive.
All right, we're going to take a minute and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We just got hard and deep, and I know we get tired, but let's think about for just a second, everyone, what do we love about being in the schools? Absolutely. I love knowing when my holidays are.
Yes. Yeah, it can be a really great schedule, I think. Yeah.
I know for sure that because I know that when I was working in post-acute, I would have to work, if I didn't work Thanksgiving, I knew I'd have to work Christmas,
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
do know that I do love that. Yes.
And I think if you love working in pediatrics, like working with kids, it's a really amazing atmosphere because if you've ever worked, say, in an outpatient clinic as opposed to a school, you really only get them for that short period of time. And yes, you might have more interaction with the parent, but they're in school a lot for a long period of time. You can see and observe and take and have more insight on so many different facets of their day and what is important to them, what is difficult for them, what are their hopes and dreams for being at school, or do they really not like it? What's their favorite part about school? I feel like you get so much more, you get so much closer with our students than sometimes in an outpatient clinic, I think. And you get to really see the full scope of who they are and who they want to be and how we can help them get there.
And when we're looking at what we should be doing in the schools, I think that's bringing us back. I mean, it really does bring us back to evidence-based practice. What should we be doing in the schools?
So very distinctly from if we're talking about clinical versus a school model, absolutely. So the very big defining factor is we should be serving students that can't access their educational curriculum. So whether that be they have a language disorder or whether that's feeding and swallowing disorder where they can't access lunchtime or their environment, or if it's articulation where their articulation is significantly impaired, it's impacting their spelling, it's impacting their ability to progress through the curriculum, which is so different than outpatient, right? So we can say that someone has a speech sound disorder, say in an outpatient setting, if they have one sound distortion, right? Absolutely, you'd see that kid in an outpatient clinic, but in the schools, not necessarily, right? If they're able to communicate with their friends and they have great grades and there's no barrier for them, they might not need the services from us, right? Even though we might want to give it to them. That's the hardest part because we really want to help in every moment. But in the schools, we really want to focus on what's impacting their education and hone in on that specifically. And then, if the family wants to seek services outside, then that's okay. But our call is to really make sure that we're dialing down because if we don't, then our caseload increases, then our workload increases. If we're really not meeting the merits of IDEA, which says that we're really only giving services to students that need it for their education.
I think that is a podcast all
absolutely
about the specifics of what school-based should look like. Absolutely. I think that is probably bigger than we can get into for today, but I would love to do one specifically on that because I think that we school-based clinicians, we are here for the kids and we want to help them in every aspect. And I think it is hard for us to let go, but you know what? I want to say, Karen, thank you for popping in. She said what she loves is the fact that we do get to see them from grade to grade. And that is rewarding. I love that positive. You might get to see them longer than in a clinic because insurance might not cover therapy for very long. Oh, that's the flip side of that. Yeah, thank you, Karen. That is true. But I do like the thought is that, so I know I'm feeding and swallowing, so I put together safe feeding plans for kids, right? And I say from the get-go, and I think this surprises everybody as soon as I say it, I'm going to establish this dynamic feeding plan of care, but guess what? Our goal is to get them off.
Exactly.
It isn't to keep them on. Yeah. So I think when we're starting to think about our caseload and our workload is that what are we doing to get them off the caseload and workload? So we need to think about what are we actually doing? And is it getting them accessing their education? Because if it's not, then we shouldn't be doing it. Is that?
Absolutely. And I think that really comes down to maybe what we used to see happening in speech maybe 20, 30 years ago, where you're pulling out 30 minutes, you have like a game that doesn't at all apply to any level of curriculum. we really want to continue to move away from that to make sure that what we're doing is super targeted, that we're even using the curriculum so that they're getting double benefit, right? They're reviewing it with you. They're also reviewing it in their class. They have way more chance of success. And I really think the more that we can start to have those conversations about what does this look like, our goal is to dismiss the students so that they are succeeding in school. It's a celebration when that happens. And I always like to have that conversation all the way back at initial eligibility, to have that conversation of, we're going to work on this. What does that look like? What are we hoping that looks like when we come to the end of this? And I know it's really scary sometimes for parents because they get really attached to us, right? We've been in their kids' lives. We've been helping their child. They've been seeing them progress. But really starting that conversation at the beginning, at the initial eligibility, really makes, as you continue to approach progress and dismissal, it makes those conversations a little bit easier when you focus on it as a celebration. And that's what we're there for. We're not supposed to be there for, birth to, 3 to 21 years if they don't need it, right? We want to make sure that be moving them towards independence.
Which kind of, with our second poll question, which is what is the biggest barrier to lessening our workload and caseload, is it was split practically 50-50 on between the support, not having the support by admin. Well, maybe we should break it down like that. The second one was misunderstanding our role. Maybe we'll go to that one first, because that's kind of what we're talking about, is we need to first understand our role. Mm-hmm. Our role is not to fix, right?
Absolutely.
Sorry?
Absolutely. Yeah. Our role is not to fix.
No, it is to get them accessing their curriculum. So the first is us understanding our role in the schools, and it is different. As much as we want to be everything to everybody, we also have to understand their rights to be in the class with their peers and not being pulled.
Right. And the legal terms are right. Least restrictive environment, you'll see in IDEA, things like free and appropriate public education, that comes up a lot. And so even spelled out within the law is saying you want to be able to put that child in a setting where the least restrictive, right? Not the most restrictive because they have the most support, but can we give them just enough so that they're challenged, but they're able to meet, continue to progress in their curriculum. We don't want to give them everything, right, if that's not necessarily what they need to be able to access. And I think, like you said, it is hard sometimes because we really want to, as much as possible, and it comes from such a great place. Yeah. Sometimes, and that it just builds upon our workload too. If we don't go back to those initial questions of what is an educational model versus a clinical model. Can you explain it in like an elevator pitch so you're able to just explain it right off the top to a parent or even to a teacher, the difference between what you do in a school and if you worked outside of a school? So I think it's a really important point to make sure that you're able to do.
And then also, how do we get our admins on board on, because it seems like we get pressure, especially because it isn't up to us. Mm-hmm. We're not the sole determinant on whether or not they have speech services. We are a component. We are part of that eligibility. However, we sometimes don't have that support or get trumped, I guess.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So that's an important distinction also about working in the school. You're one member of a team, right? And every person on that team has an equal voice. Yeah. And then also the person that's agreeing on behalf of the school district or the local education agency, that's also an important voice there. So what I like to say is you come in with your clinical recommendations, the things that you know, because that's your area of expertise, right? And you give that. And if there's something that you don't agree with, I think in those meetings, it's okay to not agree. And that it wouldn't be I wouldn't be having that conversation the first time in front of a parent, but I would make sure that you're giving your recommendations, you're documenting it as well, whether it's within your own emails and notes to your administrator. And then you can also document it within the IEP. it doesn't always work out that we're able to, unfortunately, that it's just our voice, it's everybody's voice at the table for the IEP. But it's important to make sure that you're documenting so that when you come back to your administrator later and be like, here are the reasons why we should have made a different decision. We're going to continue forward with this in the IEP, but I'm going to come back to you in 6 weeks and show you the data, and we're going to talk about this again. That's what I like to do if you're really not agreeing with the decision. It's tricky. I would say, though, to your first point, how do we get them on board? I would say it starts with what we talked about before. Those tiny steps, especially if they have, say they're a brand new assistant principal and they've never really worked very closely with an SLP. They've never really worked that closely in special education. It's starting those very small relationship building, like, hey, I'm the SLP. These are the days that I'm here. This is what I do. It could even be just like a short email, like with a couple of links to an ASHA page, the public pages that really break it down, that are for consumers, that give you a good example of what an SLP does, those really small things. Maybe during National Speech Language Hearing Month, we do change the names, and I always pause to try to remember what the name is. You do a bulletin board, different things like that, like small things you can do to get people to first know your role and know your worth in your expertise. Somebody has a question. I don't want to miss that.
Yeah, thank you, Britannia. Thoughts about those hard decisions for dismissal when something isn't fixed? Because again, I mean, I'm being what I was about to say might sound a little sassy, but I'm saying like children go to the next grade and they've received C's. Right? And a parent could say, well, I want them to have all A's, but we wouldn't retain them. I don't know if that's a good analogy. That might just be muddying the waters. I was trying to, help us. Help us.
I'm here. I'm here to help. We could have a full hour about this as well. We could probably have a whole day on something like this, but just basically there are those 3 components of eligibility. So when we're in the schools, not when we're outpatient, when we're in the schools, there are 3 questions we have to answer. Does the child have a disability? Well, so did any of your standardized tests or in your observations, did it come out that that child has, let's say, a speech sound disorder? Yes, the answer to that would be yes. Do they need specially designed instruction in that area? And are they able to access the curriculum? Those are the other 2 questions. So if we say no to any of those questions, then the child isn't eligible, right? The child isn't, they can have a speech sound disorder and still not be eligible to receive that service. And so I think when you educate regarding that, the model and how it's different, yes, the parents aren't necessarily going to love it every time, especially if there's still a lingering speech sound disorder. But what I like to say is beyond those 3 questions, like what's happening in the classroom? What's happening? Are they able to access? Are they doing well? Are they happy? Are they succeeding? Like, what are the teachers telling us, right? And all that extra evidence, just in addition to, say, 1 standard score, which, doesn't tell us hardly anything about a child, to be honest with you.
Right.
What's everything else around it that can tell us like how that child's thriving in the environment, and really focus on those things. There are going to be some really hard dismissals. We all know this. We're going to have to go through that with parents, and just kind of leading them through the differences and really being empathetic to the fact that they're probably feeling a lot of fear, right? That if the service is being taken away, that something's going to happen. And I found reassuring them that we're still there. We're still in the community. We're still going to be able to wave hi to their child. We're still going to be a resource to the staff and teachers. Bless you. In case anything.
I am so sorry, y'all.
No, it's okay.
No, my.
Sometimes that does help reduce their fears down as well, if you think about it from that perspective.
Because I think it's, especially with the speech sound, that might be an easier one.
Right.
But I think parents feel more support, more something if they know their child has an IEP.
Yes.
They feel like they're more protected. And so we could get pushback on that.
Sure. Especially speech sound disorders is a little bit easier of an example, but if you think of something along the lines of developmental language disorder, we know from the research, going to persist. That's going to persist throughout life. Does that mean that they, for the rest of their schooling, need twice a week, 30-minute pull-out session? No, that's going to shift and change what they need based on the accommodations that we put into their IEP based on their own progress, right? So the disorder might not change, or the difference, it might not change, but what matters is that the function, what's actually happening in that child's environment, and how can we explain that to the parents. If you can't explain it simply, like really work on how you can explain it really simply, have some extra handouts and some basic things to give them after, because IEP meetings and eligibility meetings can be really overwhelming for a family. And so even just having that quick conversation, but then also giving them another resource, I think is helpful so they can process it and then kind of come back to it possibly a little bit later. But you can also, I will say, call ASHA.
Okay.
Email ASHA if you have a really difficult case. This is what I do a lot of the week, is answer phone calls from people that are in more difficult situations, and they just need to talk through a specific case with a speech pathologist. And we talk through those things, like what resources can you provide them? What studies can you show them? What wording can you use? Like, let's practice talking through it. So you can always do those things if you are running up against those really difficult cases with your families.
Because it's really hard because every student's different. So so like it might, what I really wanted to do would be, okay, Lauren, so what do we say to a parent? And you're not going to be able to answer this because there's so many other, and I know this, but I'm like, so if we do have a child that has a language disorder, the eligibility was language. And so they still have the disability, right? And the goals are all being co-implemented, and they are making progress on their IEP goals. Okay. What I guess my first thing would be, well, then maybe the pulling them out is not the best use of our time if they're being co-implemented. So changing our service delivery, first of all.
Absolutely.
And then once we have been doing that and it's happening in the classroom.
Like, can you empower then the teacher? Is the teacher able to implement that in the classroom, whatever those accommodations are? And it depends also if that child has another, like, say, for example, they have a specific learning disability or OHI, if they already have some other supports in place, it's a little bit different. But say it's a child just with a speech and language impairment, official educational category that we have to call it.
Right.
In that case, I would say once we get to that point where that child is able to really move through the curriculum with almost more like a universal design for learning. Like, the teacher just has to make a tweak here and there, like they would for differentiated instruction within their classroom, that they have different levels. When we get to that point, do they need specially designed instruction from a speech language pathologist, right? Or do they need the teacher having a consult from someone like me just to make sure those continue? And you kind of change the service delivery and you keep moving through that model. So when you're at the point to say, I think that we're ready, based on all this data, we're ready for a dismissal or to move down to a consult, based on all of these things, I think it's easier for the parent to hear when you're able to say, these are all the things we've done, these are all the safeguards in place, and look at the progress that your child's made throughout the year. So yeah, and we could talk about that endlessly, I'm sure.
Yeah, but as we get towards the end I want to talk about how it should be, like, not me, you're the one who brought it up. You take credit that you said it is a celebration.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think showing that growth to parents, that they are able to do this without us is that's the hero there.
And I think too, if you think about it, even from like a parenting perspective, also, like, as much as you want to do everything to make things easier for your child, right? You know, the benefit of them having to take ownership, right? And to start to advocate for themselves, start to be able to say to a teacher, for example, it's easier for me. I learn better this way, right? How empowering for a child if they're able to get to that point in their high school years to be able to say that to a teacher. That's a huge success because that's going to serve them for the rest of their life to be like, this is how I intake information. These are the kind of supports I need, and that's going to continue on. So from the perspective of it's such a celebration when we can get to that point with a student, really see them start to thrive as they move towards things like post-secondary, whether they're going to college or whether they're moving on to a job. So really continuing to have those conversations in your meetings with parents, whether it's at parent-teacher conference, whether it's at, just an email or at those longer IEP meetings, making sure you talk about it even from the beginning and all the way through makes those conversations go so much better.
Absolutely. And Sylvia, thank you for jumping in and saying that workload is a concept that should be addressed, yes, by PAC and in state legislature. I think that's exactly why we're talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. So that monies for adequate staffing can be the root. Oh, wait, sorry. I hope I'm reading this right. Workload is a concept that should be addressed by PAC and state legislature. Monies for adequate staffing can be at the root of unreasonable numbers. Sorry to see that caseload numbers is still being utilized so prevalently. Same. Weighted caseload studies were utilized 10 years ago. Countries and districts also need to make changes to retain SLP staff. Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
And advocating for ourselves and really talking about workload rather than saying our numbers and looking at our workload. But the other thing too, I think is on the flip side of that, not flip side, but goes hand in hand, is what we're doing to make sure that we don't have these huge caseload numbers. And then we work on the workload, keeping kids on that truly don't need us is one of the issues. But I think I'm going to say it. I think we might be afraid if our numbers drop, that that might affect our job, or they might move us to somewhere else, whereas they're not looking at the caseload. I mean, excuse me, at the workload.
Okay.
So I think thank you, Sylvia, you're right. We need to be talking workload rather than caseload the whole time, because because I don't want a speech path to be given extra duties because the number is a certain number versus looking at what the caseload is. Yeah.
And Sylvia, what a great point too, because a lot of these laws are made at the state level. So, and a lot of the advocacy really happens at the state level and the things that affect you most in your school district. And so I really encourage you to get involved with your state association, even just to get the newsletters so you know what's happening. And then also to look at different things like some take action forms where you just press a button on a website at ASHA and immediately something gets sent to your specific congressperson or representative. Because the more SLPs in your state that do that, the more that the legislators stand up and take notice, right? Like, oh, I wonder why we're getting 150 take action letters about fully funding IDEA. Well, there's a reason, because we need more staff, right? And we all know that we need more staff, but say they're hearing nothing. They're not getting any of those letters. They're thinking it's not that important to, say, the state of where I live, Pennsylvania or Maryland. It's not that important to them to stand up for fully funding of IDEA. So I really encourage you to get involved in your state association as you can, or just take 2 minutes and hit a take action campaign for those things. It really is the fastest thing, and it really does help.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. And I think for all of us hearing that is, we have to advocate for ourselves, advocate for that workload.
And also get some partners, ASHA is here, your state is there to partner with you to help navigate through these conversations. So you are not alone by any stretch of the imagination. Please reach out. There are lots of people here to help talk you through any of these situations that you're going through and help support you as you continue through this journey.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you so much for reminding us that ASHA's there. We can call. Like you said, that you're receiving phone calls to help us work through some tough situations.
Absolutely. Ethical situations, dismissal, specific case situations, or some feeding and swallowing, all kinds of different questions. You can call the Action Center. They route you to, if your question is schools, they'll route you to one of us. You can email me directly. You can email our proxy box directly. And, that's what we're here to do. And we're all SLPs and we've all worked in the schools. And sometimes it's just talking to another person that understands what you do and really talking through it that can make facing a situation like talking into an administrator or talking to a parent that's not that happy just seem a little bit less daunting when you talk through it with someone else first.
I love it. Thank you, Lauren. So our takeaway is reach out and collaborate. I love it. Thank you so much. Oh, Lauren, we're getting so many people that are listening saying thank you, thank you, thank you to you. What a great presentation. And I agree. This has been so powerful. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. I knew workload caseload, but now I feel like I really have a better understanding and I'm so grateful for you for that. Thank you. Thank you for all our listeners out there listening. We are at the end of our night. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. For our School of Speech listeners, we have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. The code is SCHOOL20. That is SCHOOL20. Hope to see you on our next episode. Also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comment section or send us a message on social media.